has suggested that senior commanders knew that Iraqi forces were mistreating their prisoners but failed to take any action. 400,000 documents released by the whistleblowing website Wikileaks describes torture and abuse of Iraq detainees, including electrocutions and executions. The US government says the documents are only raw observations and they claim they could have the effect of helping America's enemies. Now, Wikileaks has been holding a news conference this morning in central London, and a short time ago its founder, Julian Assange, defended his decision to publish the documents about the Iraq war.
This disclosure is about the truth. Philip Knightley, the great investigative reporter and Australian who for the past 30 or 40 years has made the UK his home, said that the first casualty of war is the truth. But the attack on the truth by war begins long before war starts and continues long after a war ends. In our release of these 400,000 documents about the Iraq war, the intimate detail of that war from the US perspective, we hope to correct some of that attack on the truth that occurred before the war, during the war, and which has continued on since the war officially concluded.
That's Julian Assange. Well, the Professor John Sloboda of the independent group Iraq Body Count told the press conference that the information gathered by US soldiers themselves about the Iraq death toll made for shocking reading.
Day by day, secretly, soldiers all over Iraq have been writing detailed reports of the violent deaths they cause, witness, or are informed about. Dates, times, precise locations, names, ages, and occupations of victims have all been stored away in these logs. It is very good that this data has been collected, but it is wrong and unjustifiable that it has been kept secret for so long. Iraq Body Count has started the huge task of integrating the new information into the existing patchwork, just as we would for any other source brought to our attention. In the few weeks since we've had access to the logs, we've only scratched the surface. But by careful sampling and matching of these logs against what is already in our database, we have a clear, emerging picture of what these logs contain as a whole.
Well, our security correspondent Gordon Carrera has been at this press conference and he joins me now from central London. And Gordon, what headlines did you pick out that we didn't already know?
Well, I think we've been learning over the last few hours, really, what's in these logs. There may be much more, because you have to remember there's nearly 400,000 documents, and so it will take some time to really digest what's in them. But a number of media organisations did have early access to this, to these logs, and have started producing their reports. We've also had the first look at them. There do appear to be an enormous amount of detail on abuse and perhaps torture by Iraqi security forces, which was reported by the Americans but not necessarily investigated. Also, really, more details on civilian casualties. The group Iraq Body Count, who've been at this press conference, are saying they now estimate that 150,000 people were killed since 2003, 80% of civilians. And I think it will be in the individual stories of how some of those people died that the power of these logs will come forth, rather than just in the abstract numbers.
We've heard this week from the Secretary of State, US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, condemning the release of them, talking about it putting the lives of the United States and its partner service members and civilians at risk. But if we leave that aside for one moment, it's the embarrassment of it being put into the public domain as well, isn't it, Gordon?
Well, absolutely, particularly in the United States, particularly perhaps for the Obama administration, if some of the problems continued not just in the Bush administration but through into the Obama administration. There is this question, though, as you said, about how much this will endanger future operations. They said that about the Afghan release, which came in July, and there's been a debate about whether that actually did endanger security and whether there have been any deaths as a result of it. Here at the press conference they were saying that there is no evidence of that, but the US has been saying that these leaks do endanger national security.
I think one of the things that has come through is the detail that's been in it, including the names of all these civilians who are unreported to this point.
Well, that's right. And for instance, there was talk here about some a particular massacre in which 28 people were killed. Now, before, those were nameless people, but here in these logs, you find the names of those individuals who were... And so it really will be in finding out the details of how some of those people died, whether it was at the hands of insurgents, roadside bombs, whether it was at the hands of the Iraqi security forces, or perhaps at the hands of US troops, that I think some of the individual stories will in that detail, will be the power of these logs. But there will be a lot of debate about whether they really do provide a full picture of what happened, rather than just snapshots of individual incidents.
Gordon, thank you very much indeed, and I'm going to take you straight back to that press conference. This is Julian Assange, who's the founder of Wikileaks, talking now. It's a question and answer session, so let's just listen to what they're saying.
Press about the relative importance. But Iraq is now just cool enough, although remember there's still 50,000 US troops there and something like 150,000, 100,000 contractors. Iraq is now cool enough, at least in the public imagination, to properly take a look at it. And that's not something that is yet possible with Afghanistan. We did a little bit of that with the Afghan war log release because it was a primary source documentation. But otherwise, views about patriotism and the supporting of troops and so on interferes with the process. For Iraq, I can see already in the news reportage a much fairer and less defensive portrayal of what happened in Iraq that has been revealed by this release. So these two countries do not stand in isolation. These are both modern Western wars. And the lessons of Iraq, which are ongoing, remember this material covers significant abuses occurring during the first year of the Obama administration, can be applied to Afghanistan and can be applied to other places that Western governments may choose in isolation or in coalition to invade. The war itself in the United States, I think, is becoming more of an issue. The Republicans are using the mismanagement of the Afghan war against the Democrats. We're 1 week before the congressional elections. And the Democrats can point to, rightly, the terrible abuses that occurred under a Republican administration. I hope that will permit raising of this issue. But I think in the last 24 hours, the press has been doing precisely what they should. And there's a good and broad spectrum. And you know, the press, when it concentrates on a press issue, can overplay things. But I think their response to this issue has been broad and proportionate and will continue.
And we'll leave the press conference there again for you. Julian Assange, the editor of Wikileaks and founder of it, talking there. But the main thrust coming out so far, as we heard from our correspondent Gordon Carrera, is the detail which is in these documents, hundreds of thousands of them, particularly the names of the civilians who lost their lives in the conflict at the hands, they are saying, of the Iraqi forces and the torture that they claim was carried out. So we'll be back to the press conference a little later on for more on that.